Hello, this is Dr. Harriet Fraad.
And I'm Juliana Forlano, here with our podcast, Capitalism Hits Home.
This is a show about the intersections, so many, of class, capitalism, race, gender, and every other aspect of our personal lives.
We hope to educate, activate, and even alleviate some of the burdens we are all experiencing living in this capitalist USA.
We hope this program serves you well. It's brought to you by Democracy at Work, and if you think of ways that we could serve you better, write to us. We want to hear.
Yeah, we want to hear. Oh,
Now,
Harriet, you had
today,
the best idea for today's program. I'm so excited about this.
I'm very inspired by the impact of emotion on everything, on our political and capitalist lives, on our everyday lives. You know, when I saw the rampage of January 6th, where Trump's encouraged supporters invaded the White House, unstopped plan, and created such a lovely image for anyone, how easy it is to invade the United States if you have an internal cooperation. However, you know, the emotion was so visible. They were heady with excitement. They wanted, this was a release for them and an excitement for them. And it gave them three things they really needed. It gave them purpose. It gave them an identity as red-hatted, red-blooded male, mainly Trump supporters. And it gave them an identity, because their identity as superior, in quotes, white males is fast, luckily, disappearing. And Trump promised them a return of manufacturing. Nope. Cleaning up the swamp. Nope, he hired them. Improving their economic lives. Nope. They're sick, they're poor. But what he gave them was he gave them a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, a sense of identity, a sense of community, and a sense that he understood that they felt robbed. And they have been robbed.
Harriet, it occurs to me they could get all of those same senses of community and belonging, and perhaps even a job and a sense of meaning if they joined an organized labor movement
that was leftist and pushed people and really gave them a sense of of purpose and identity and community. The labor movement was weakened when they threw out the leftists in the 50s, and it didn't recover because the leftists were the spark.
These other people don't understand. Yeah, and maybe that actually leads into exactly the conversation we were hoping to have, is the idea that if I have this, that emotion and the community building part of the left is something that's missing. Missing.
And it is totally important, because what happened when the communists, socialists, and who they thought were fellow travelers, which is anybody on the left, were thrown out of the labor movement, the spark died. No one makes up, when people are on a strike, they may get $1 an hour. It usually doesn't make up at all for the time they lost, but they have a sense of their own power, a sense of solidarity and community and identity and participation and purpose. And that's worth it.
It's, I cover strikes in my other, many other incarnations. I covered strikes and in the street activism. And I also was a part of the Occupy Wall Street movement. And you could really feel when you walked into the area, when you walk into an area where people are striking, you can feel the beautiful solidarity between human beings. And that is why I think, these violent forces on the right of corporatism, wherever they're coming from, seek to really crush that, because that is the emergence of the human spirit. And, a capitalist system can't have you recognizing that the richness of life comes from the brotherhood of men, of they say your fellow man, but your fellow woman and your fellow man. Uh,
Your
th-
fellow
they
person.
Your
Yeah,
fellow person. Thank you. Yes, exactly. So I really think that one of the reasons they work so hard to crush this is not because they even want to save that dollar an hour, but because they want to disempower people and make sure there's no real space other than what you're allowed to have in your space, your family. That's it. Of unity.
that's right. And I think one of the reasons that all the corporations that are big, at least publicly, condemned the actions of January 6th at the Capitol is they don't want people out of control. It's fine if Trump continues and gives them the tax cut that is a windfall forever, depriving everyone else, and doesn't do a thing about their offshore accounts where they stash most of their billions. That's fine. Let him continue. He's a little distasteful. But once he gets people ignited to act, he's out on his ass. And if things are too hard, like they were in Germany in the 1930s, then they take the risk of a controlled fascist movement. This wasn't even a controlled fascist movement. There were some obvious controlled fascists who planned it, who ran the buses, who had their handcuffs, who knew whose members made reconnaissance photos and gave them pathways to where the
Yeah,
senators
where
were
the
meeting.
senators were hiding and meeting in their secret offices and whatnot.
Right, and pulled out the panic buttons in Ayanna Pressley and others' offices, and
Oh,
also
I didn't know
who
about that.
yes, Ayanna Pressley made a public complaint that she went to push the panic buttons. Somebody ripped them out of the wall. Someone
Wow.
was working inside in a well organized way, but most of these people were a very undisciplined, enraged force, and corporations don't want that. However, they did want them to be misinformed. They wanted them to think that Antifa is terrible. Actually, we fought World War II on Antifa. We were against the fascists.
Yeah.
And
Actually, Antifa is not even a group. It's just an ideology that you might say, yeah, I'm
right,
not into fascism.
right.
That's it. That's what that is.
That government is your enemy when the most popular president we ever had was FDR, big government. Otherwise, we couldn't have had all of his wonderful programs. At any rate, they didn't want to see these unruly people because they want control and they want people home watching TV and watching TV ads and consuming expensive junk food and obeying the status quo and not speaking out about what bothers them. And so they condemned these people. This was not to their liking. And since they were organized by fascists, it was hardly to our liking either. But your point is so important. In the 30s, what gave people the strength to march by the thousands in New York and elsewhere for jobs and joining the biggest, most powerful union ever, the CIO of all these different areas, was a sense of these three things: a purpose in life, an identity as a worker and a fighter and a leftist, and
It's
also a community.
mm, that's just what I was going
And
to say. That sense of solidarity that you don't get enough of now that we're not sort of living in basically tents, like and moving around as a group. How human beings were before the Industrial Revolution.
and when the Socialist Party and the Communist Party and the whatever else party were not out there saying, we are the people, we make the money. You could say it now, the essential workers who get paid the least, usually behind the grocery store delivering food. And as we saw at Hunts Point Market, where the food is delivered, unloading it and loading it, are the most poorly paid. However, uh, they are essential. They don't even get the supplement they used to, but they get the message. Without you, it can't go on. Without your work, it can't go on. That's why they pushed you back into the
That's
slaughterhouses to
really
get COVID.
that is really interesting, Harriet, because I don't know if it's just trolls or whomever, but there's always people saying, oh, well, what did Occupy do anyway? What did the Women's March do anyway? The most recent one. What did and I say, well, in Occupy, we learned about the 99% versus the 1%. And now, to your point, we are learning that these people who've been told that they're just the throwaways of society and they're paid as if they're just, replaceable by the next one, are actually the essential workers that have kept us going during a pandemic. Lloyd Blankfein is not an essential worker. I'm sure we could all get along without him.
Very well. In fact, we could do better if all those banks were either eliminated, nationalized, and became co-ops, which is what they did in Iceland, which is why they didn't have austerity. They had a vote when their banks failed them, and whether they wanted to have austerity or whether they wanted to cut back, eat more of their own products, and also put the banksters in jail and take over the other banks that failed. They all loved it. We were given a
That's why
referendum
they don't
too.
give any. That's why we don't get any coverage of what happens there. It's again kind of this media blackout of like, oh, we don't want to let other people know that there's possibilities.
Right. That's right. And that's where the media, who live on ads from the corporations, thrive by keeping the message contained. The
Yeah.
New York Times is very bad on labor. They didn't even bother covering the fact that AOC came down to the Hunts Point market instead of going to the inauguration and sitting there disgruntled with fuzzy mittens like our wonderful Bernie did. She
Feel the
joined,
burn.
she brought coffee as she had so often, and she spoke. And she spoke out at the strike of the Hunts Point market loaders and unloaders, and they won a few days later, and they won everything they asked for. But that was not covered, and it wasn't on TV news, even
I
though I
didn't
thought it
even
was much
know about it
exciting.
until you told me about it.
No,
For
because
people who don't
it's
know
a
what it is, can you tell a little more detail about what was going on there?
yeah. The Hunts Point market has workers that take food that's brought in from the countryside, unload it, and put it on trucks so it can be taken to stores and distribution centers for people, whether they're
New York
ordering it
City,
fresh
right?
direct in New York City or going to their local supermarket or wherever they're going. And the work they do gets paid. Their highest salary there is $40,000 a year. Most people get around $30,000. They come in at about 5 o'clock in the morning. They work in the cold. They do heavy work. And because there's even more demand, the owners of Hunts Point have been making billions of dollars while keeping salaries low.
Mhm.
Well, they went on strike. They struck for $1 more an hour, and they struck for better health coverage. They won $1.85 an hour and 40 cents more an hour towards their health coverage. New York Times didn't cover it. The Daily News morning edition did cover it. The Daily News is much better on labor, but it didn't have any pictures of AOC. That came in the evening edition. So that this was not, and it wasn't a featured story anywhere. Like they have featured stories. Trump picks his nose, Trump wipes his
Oh,
ass, whatever.
I was just reporting earlier on how we talked so many times about Trump picks his nose and picks his ass, and I think we talked 4 times over the course of a year about the war, the proxy war in Yemen. That's what I was covering this morning. It's
That's
unbelievable.
and it's not covered that we lost in Afghanistan. The Taliban is taking over. Great, there's trillions of dollars down the tubes that we need, and we lost, and we've lost every war or had a draw since World War II, which was the last just war we had. So, the newspapers who thrive on ads are not serving us in that way. And as you pointed out, they're not showing the power that we have. And the left also
No.
was curtailed and successfully in the 50s. And Occupy brought it back with its, as you said, Juliana, 1%, 99%. And I went down there too. And the feeling
Wasn't
of,
it wonderful?
it was wonderful. The feeling of community and collectivity was
And
wonderful.
care. It was a feeling of you
care.
caring and being cared for.
That's
It
right.
was
And when people were not caring, they didn't beat them up. They surrounded them and pushed them out of the Occupy. A whole
I
group
think
of people were hard to do that.
I think psychologically speaking, fear really helps capitalists stay as capitalist systems run. Because if I feel like I'm not cared for, then I better hurry up and make some money because I'm going to have to pay for my own retirement. I'm going to have to pay for my own health care. No one else is going to do it. I don't want to burden the loved ones I am allowed to talk to now, because now we are so isolated even from our own loved ones. And I do want to add, I am not only physically isolated from my loved ones, but because of everything that's happening in the news, with the news, the siloization of news. Um, I am isolated ideologically from my family members, and so we can't even have real any kind of depth of discussion. And when you're just talking about weather with the people you absolutely love, there's something missing there when you can't actually talk at depth about things you care about without inflaming tension and ruining Thanksgiving or whatever it is. Even a happy birthday phone call came in. I had my birthday, and my relative lives in a Sinclair media soaked media environment. It's all right wing media. And, once she said some talking point, I was like, I'm out. I can't, there's nothing else we
Yeah,
can discuss.
that's
So
right.
there's this loneliness and this fear that makes you want to run out and hurry up and get the better job and climb over your neighbor and stab your neighbor because who's going to help you? It's almost like everyone's in survival mode. And I think
That's
socialism
exactly right.
socialism lets us come from our higher capacities, not our survival mode brain.
That's what we were talking about last week when we talked about why sex is better under socialism. Because women get pensions, because women have all the wonderful services that support their work, their child care, their after school care, their laundry, their food preparation. Now, they did leave those responsibilities to women instead of having them shared, but the government took over and supported what were still sexist women's roles.
It's
And
funny,
that meant
Harriet, because I don't think of when I'm having sex that I'm worried about my pension, but I am worried about it during the day, and that comes over into the evening or whatever.
worse. And your pension, if you were married to somebody who had to be pleased sexually without much regard to you in order to give you your spending money for the week or in order to pay for the daycare, it, it that power differentiation depending on income is a terrible thing to do to people's equal and loving relationships wherever they are. You don't have to worry about your coworker ratting you out to get a promotion with the boss, or you better have sex with the boss if you want to keep your job, like the
Mm.
people at Fox News did. That if you take care of people, their emotions are not wrapped up with trying to please in order to keep basic financial security. And that's why socialism is a more humane system, because it allows people not to depend for their daily life on another human being with too much power over them. And that's why working in co ops makes more sense, because everybody's an equal. The officers are elected and can't make more than 8 times what the average person makes and can be impeached all the time. And people have some kind of equality. And that creates an emotional environment where people dare to speak and have a purpose of helping the group, have an
Mm.
identity as part of the group, and have a community as part of the group.
And
And
then they're
all
less
those
likely to fall into these insane groups that are being whipped up by forces that really don't care about them at all.
that's
Trump
right.
doesn't care about these people. Yeah.
No, he doesn't. In fact, I think, although I haven't seen this elsewhere, it's my suspicion that the reason he quashed the news he got in December 1999 about the virus was that he's in the hospitality industry. His hotels,
Mhm.
2019, his hotels, his casinos,
Right.
his golf courses
Mhm.
would be denied the money. And what he
Mhm.
thought about was only himself, as we talked about the dangers of narcissism in capitalism, that you just think
Mhm.
about yourself and your own money and how to get ahead. And you
Mhm.
don't care that you are responsible, partly at least, for 500,000 deaths.
I was saying that
Or
he didn't read the job description when when he went to try to be president, he didn't really understand what the description of the job actually was. You're supposed to be
that's right,
serving the public. How would he
exactly.
even know to do that? He had no idea, you know?
No, he hadn't, and that was the furthest thing from his mind. He said he ran to enhance his brand. In other
Well,
words,
good
get the
job. No.
yeah. And anyway,
Yeah.
hopefully, the Trump brand is hopefully in ruins and hopefully will stay there. We'll
It's
see.
interesting because now that he's out of office, I even hesitate to wanna talk about it. It's almost like, okay, that trauma is we're still parsing it and thinking he might be impeached. There's a whole thing going on. It's still kind of happening, but he's been off Twitter. He has not necessarily been reported on. His actions are not as much part of the consciousness of, America, and I'm just so grateful. I can't even tell you how grateful I am. Not that I'm a huge fan of what I'm not just speaking politically here, but it's just the embodiment and the leadership of with the embodiment of narcissism and the embodiment of not caring is just hard to watch.
It is hard to watch because emotionally, it's a disaster. That level of indifference to us is a disaster. And it happens over and over again where people have power, like Jeffrey Epstein. He had all that money. And I noticed that Leon Black, head of Apollo Financial Management, a world financial management company, was only recently deposed from his position because he invested 158 million with Jeffrey Epstein and was a frequent flyer on the Lolita Express,
Ugh,
which was Epstein's plane to land on Sex Slave Island and rape young girls in the air and on the island. And of course,
ugh.
Trump was a frequent flyer. Clinton went several times. Talk about narcissism and talk about emotional estrangement. You don't realize you're raping a child, how they would feel. Emotion is very important. And I think if you wanted to run an organization well, you would have to consciously say, we need an emotional environment in which everyone is respected here. Everyone has a voice, everyone is respected. And that is seldom even acknowledged. What is an emotional environment? So that at Fox News or even at CBS, where the head appeared naked after suggesting that we have a little conference and I'll go open a bottle of wine. And then he came in naked. His penis wasn't the bottle opener, because he was loyal and had the
Oh,
power.
Harriet, let's title this episode, "His Penis Wasn't the Bottle Opener." Harriet,
Yeah,
I'm thinking about how, just the fact that we have to participate in such a vicious marketplace, and you can't just leave that at the door. It actually conditions your neurons. It conditions your way of being. So you just can't check those non-emotions or the vicious kind of emotions that you wind up with from being part of the marketplace when you get home to your family where you're supposed to love. I've had
that's
this
right.
problem myself where I cover the craziness of the news in the morning, and then at 4 o'clock, I have to be like gentle mommy. It takes me a while to get from like, this is crazy and bad, and we got to look at this to like, oh, let's watch the flowers grow. It's a big hurdle to leap internally in order to do that.
And it affects all sorts of relationships. You come home after a job in which you had to squash yourself all day because you're being exploited and mistreated. Not only are they making money off your labor, which is, of course, they wouldn't hire you if they didn't, but you're being told you're not important in 1,000 ways that are emotionally registered. And you can come home angry and upset, and it's hard not to take it out on your partner. And so that, wife beating is one of the characteristics of quite a few of Trump's followers. They're angry people who don't have a politically left outlet for their anger that would unite them with other people in a healthy way. And they're just angry all the time. We can see what that free-floating rage can lead to.
Harriet, this has been a great conversation. Again, I see our countdown clock has us at very little left. We want to hear your comments about our subject matter. If you're watching on YouTube, please put them in the bottom. We do read them, and sometimes we ask, with your permission, we will read them in our viewer comment or question segment, as we did in the last episode. Harriet and I have a special guest coming next week. It was through Harriet's work that she's coming on. So, Harriet, why don't you do the introduction of the guest?
Okay, our guest is Kristin Godzi, who is a very smart author of several books. Her latest is Why Sex is Better Under Socialism. And I'm reaching for the book here, dropping everything as I do, but this is the book.
Yes.
And her point is basically that by ignoring many of the gains that were in the state-run, authoritarian Soviet satellite countries, we throw the baby out with the bathwater. They had better sex. They had better relationships often with each other when they weren't knocking each other out to the secret police, that is. But had relationships.
Yeah, that'll put a crimp in your foreplay.
Exactly. Watch out what you say at various moments.
I love it.
And what we can learn and what we can do to improve our own society without an authoritarian aspect as they had.
I am so much looking forward to that.
Me too.
I also have to put in a plug for, first of all, a great thank you for people who have donated to us. We are still trying to become fully self-supporting. I think they're having a meeting today to see if we're at Democracy at Work, if they can continue to support us, because although they gave us the 3 months and we have shown great growth in viewership and growth, the percentage of growth we've had in financial contributions, we cannot thank you enough, because we are almost fully self-supporting, but not quite enough that Democracy at Work doesn't necessarily have to financially support us. So if you can make a contribution, a recurring contribution, please go to our Patreon page, which is Patreon. They're a wonderful organization that helps people like us be able to support ourselves. Patreon.com/Capitalism Hits Home. That's where you can make a recurring donation. And again, if you are not, we totally, as I've said before, we get it about the situation people are in. And we are grateful for your comments on YouTube. That helps push us forward in the algorithm, for sharing us. And if you can make a financial contribution, we do appreciate that so much as well. Our Twitter handle is Democracy at Work, WRK, instead of WORK. Instagram is the same, Democracy at Work. You can find Harriet at her website, harrietfraad, FRAAD.com. And I'm Juliana Forlano at Juliana Forlano on Twitter. And I do want to say thanks everyone who came over and followed me on Twitter after you're listening to these things. We're having a good time over there. Harriet, your final thoughts?
Just thank you all very much. And we appreciate your support in whatever form you can manage it, whether it's money, which is great, whether it's also great that you send us to your friends, that you suggest us, that you put us on Facebook, that you listen, that you comment, that you write to us. It's all important. Thank you.